Now we're up to Daf Yudalid Amud Beis. The Gemara is going to offer now another interpretation, another comment on the Brisa Rishona, the first Brisa that we had mentioned. Rava Omar, Rava says the first Brisa is one uniform din, and the meaning of the Brisa is an absolute Isur Kedisha, even in a case where there's no Torah Gadol, and it's not like Tisni, and even in a Machteshes Ketana, which is a Shinu, it's always prohibited. And we originally thought that the second din was B'derech Nesinas Ta, and therefore we asked a stira from the second brisa, which was Matir Ketisha in a Machteshes Ketana. Says Rav Lokash, there's no contradiction. Ha lon veha lehu. The word lon for us always refers in the Talmud Bavli to the Bnei Bava. Lehu, them, refers to the Bnei Eretz Yisrael. So ha lon. The second brisa that was more lenient and allowed Ketisha in a small machteshes because it's a shinoi, that was only applicable for the Bnei Bava. But the first brisa that had an absolute unqualified Isur Ketisha that applies even in machteshes Ketana despite the shinoi, that addresses the Bnei Eretz Yisrael. What's the difference between the Bnei Bavel and Bnei Eretz Yisrael? And the answer is that the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, it's hard to believe, but at least at that period of time, were a little bit more wealthy. And they had avodim, they had servants. And these servants were mezalzel, they were not careful and meticulous about the Isur of Malacha on Yontif. And therefore the first brisa, which has an absolute Isur Kedisha, that applies even to a Machteshes Ketana, in Eretz Yisrael, where the Avodim were very careless, we have to be choshesh that maybe they'll, if you allow them, you give them a finger, they'll take a hand. If you allow them to be kotesh b'machteshes ketana, they will come to be kotesh machteshes gedolah. They're not going to make that distinction. So therefore, the Chacham have to prohibit all and every single case of machteshes. However, the Brisa Shnia, which was Matir Ketisha Machteshes Ketana, that was addressing the Bavel. They didn't have Avodim, and if they did have Avodim, then the Avodim were on a higher level. They weren't Mizalzel in the Isur Malach and Yontif, so we don't have to worry that if you permit them to do Ketisha with a Machteshes Ketana, there will be Mizalzel in Yontif, and they'll do Ketisha even with the Machteshes Gedolah. I just want to add one point, Lefiani is Daiti. I think what the Gemara is implying here is that Ketisha on Yontif is like a quasi d'oraisa. What do I mean? After all, he's doing the Ketisha lochal nefesh. The Torah permitted malach lochal nefesh. But if he does a Ketisha, in this case, a malacha, in the same identical way that he would have done it b'chol, then it's like he's doing a malacha that wasn't l'tzorach nefesh. And in effect, he could have done this on Erev Yontif. And therefore, in the case of Bnei Eretz Yisrael, where there were the problem of the avodim hamizalzelim, so we're afraid that they may use a machteshes gedolah if you permit them to use a machteshes ketana. Now, even you might ask, even in the worst case scenario, if they use a machteshes gedolah, it's a tzorech ochel nefesh, it's meleches ochel nefesh. But the answer is that the Rabbanan, when they prohibited a malacha, even for ochel nefesh, if it's a malacha that could have been done on Erev Yontif, and you're doing it in a way that's exactly the way you would, identical to what you did at Bechol, it's like a dorais. It's like an upgraded Isur D'Rabbanan, it's a quasi dorais. And therefore, if we allow them to use a machteshes ketana, they may come to use a machteshes gedolah. It's not exer. So the Gemara now asks the following kasha. Wait a minute. First the story, then the kasha. Rav Papi ikla lebei Mar Shmuel. So Rav Papa was a guest in the house of Mar Shmuel on Yontif. I see lay. They brought Beitza. Beitza, I guess, is what we would call today oatmeal, or maybe farina. If you remember, maybe farina is a company name. I don't know. Velo acha, and he refused to eat it. Why? Because it was made of wheat, and the wheat was nichtash tisha b'machteshes, and you're not allowed to do tisha on Yontif. And Rav Papi understood that the avodim, the servants of Mar Shmuel, prepared this daisa in a violation of an Isa Malacha with Ketisha b'machteshes. And foodstuff that was prepared through a violation of an Isa Malacha, you're not allowed to eat it on Yontif. Now there is a machlokes tanoim in Masechet Chulin Daf Tes Vav about food that was prepared on Shabbos b'Isa Malacha. Are you allowed to eat it or not? And it says there that according to Rabbi Meir, Amavashel b'Shabbos, if it was b'shogeg ye'achel, b'mezid lo ye'achel. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'shogeg ye'achel b'motzei Shabbos. In any event, it would seem that all the tanoim agree that if it was a mazid situation where he deliberately violated Shabbos, you're not allowed to eat that food, at least not on Shabbos. Now, our Gemara would seem to assume that the halacha is not like Rabbi Meir. In the case of Stam Avodim, they weren't mazid, they were only shogeg. And according to Rabbi Meir, if you violated Melechas Shabbos b'shogeg, you're allowed to eat it on Shabbos. So this is the case of Rav Papi, who refused to eat the daisa because he held that even if the malach was done on Yontif b'shogeg, you're not allowed to eat it. And again, this would, I think, further prove what I said before, that when the Rabbanon prohibited a malach on Yontif, they gave it the status, the geshpanka of a malach, with all the severe and harsh implications. So the Gemara asks, "V'dil machteshes katana avdua." Rav Papi was prepared daisa. He was presented with daisa. How did he know what they did to make this daisa? And the answer is the chazie dahavi dayek tfei. He saw that the ketisha was very fine. It was ketushos heitek, and in the machteshes katana, it's impossible to achieve those results. As we said earlier today, the best results for Ketisha require a machteshes gedola. The Gemara asked another question on Rav Papi. V'dilma me esmol avdua. Maybe the daisa was prepared on Erev Yontif. They didn't prepare it for Isur. And the Gemara answers, Rav Papi chazio dahavi kolif tzare. He saw that the chitim had a white color to them. They were peeled and white. And if the daisa had been prepared yesterday, then the chitim would have been much darker in color due to the passage of time. So since he understood and he did his detective work, that this was prepared on Yontif, it was a violation of the Isa of Ketisha on Yontif, and therefore he didn't need Ibais. The Gemara gives another answer to the questions that we asked. Ibais Ema Shani Bei Mar Shmuel Deika Pritzusa Diavdi. You might answer the following: that in general you can assume that the daisa, the cereal, was prepared by heter in a small machteshes or maybe on Erev Yontif. But in the case of the slaves in the house of Mar Shmuel, they were known to be mezalzel the Isur. Therefore, Rav Papi was choshesh that maybe it was prepared by Isur and he didn't want to eat it, and he didn't want to assume it was prepared by heter. And this leads us to the Mishnah. The Mishnah is talking about Meleches Borer on Yontif, Haborer kitnios biyontiv. And these legumes have both psoles and ochel mixed together. And he wants to separate the ochel and the psoles. Beit Shammai omrim, he's got to do it b'shinu. Borer, ochel, the ochel. He's got to take the edible part and separate it, leave the psoles behind, and immediately he's got to eat the ochel. That's called a shini, because had it been a weekday, he would have removed the psoles from the ochel. Beisil omrim borer kedarko. There's no need for a shinu. He could take the psoles from the ochel. He doesn't have to be makbid to take the ochel from the psoles. He does not require shinu. He's going to do it the same way he does it during the week, by taking the psoles. The Gemara is going to object, as we'll soon see. And the borer is becheko. In other words, he's got a garment. You can call it a talis if you like. And he stretches it out over his body, in front of his body, and he picks out the psoles from the ochel. Not only that, he can even use bikanon, which is a funnel, wider on top, and he can pour the legumes into the funnel, and the psoles is going to get stuck on the bottom. He's allowed to even use a large pan that they used for borer. He's not allowed to use a certain kind of a board that's made of wood, or a certain kind of a sieve. There are two types of a sieve. There's a nafa and a kvara. And these kalim, these utensils, are exclusively earmarked for borer. And when you do the borer, you do large amounts at a time. You don't waste your time and your effort on small amounts, which means that you're doing a borer for the purpose of tomorrow, not just for today. And on Yontif, that's prohibited, because you're not allowed to do a malach on Yontif for the sake of chol. From Gamliel Omer, af mediach v'sholeh. He has another system by which he does the borer. And what he does is he takes the kidneys, he soaks them in water, and the psoles floats to the top, and he takes it off, and now he has the ochel. There's a major machlokas here amongst the Rishonim between the Ra'ah, Rabbi Aaron Alevi on the one hand, and the Meiri on the other hand. The Ra'ah thinks that Rabbi Gamliel is a makir. He is more lenient than Beis Hillel, and he allows even this way of borer, of mediach v'sholeh, which is really a ma'aseh chol, but nevertheless he allows. Beis Hillel would not go that far to permit you to do this sholeh, mediach v'sholeh, because that's really a ma'aseh chol. The Meiri has the exact opposite opinion. He thinks that Rabbi Gamliel is coming to be machmir. And dafka in this way of my diach v'sholeh, you're allowed to do the borer. But b'kadon and b'tamchud, you're not allowed to do the borer, because that's a tircha meruba. So you just to be aware of the fact that there are two ways of understanding Rabbi Gamliel. The Gemara says, Tanya, we learned to the Brayso Rabbi Gamliel, but medvar mamurim, when were Beis Hillel matir taking out psoles? Kisha ochel meruba al hapsoles. There's too much ochel here, so we want to make life easier for him on Yontif without having to do a great tircha, and therefore Beis Hillel will allow you to remove the psoles. Avol psoles meruba al ochel. If there's more psoles than an ochel, in which case you'd have to exert yourself even more tircha in order to get rid of the psoles. Is the Re'akoli Beis Hillel would agree that you're not allowed to take out the psoles, but rather no tilsa ochel mediachas hapsoles. Again, whether or not, according to Beis Hillel, he should be removing the ochel or the psoles depends on rov. If the ochel is rov, then take out the psoles. If the psoles is rov, then take out the ochel. Mara says, I don't understand. This makes no sense. Psoles meruba la ochel. If you've got a mixture which is mostly psoles, mi command shari, forget it. we're not going to allow you to do borer. We're not even allow you to move it from the spot because the minority of ochel is batel in the rov solas. And therefore it's not roy l'klum. It's muktzah. And even the ochel you're not allowed to take. Lo tzricha de nafish tircha. When he's talking about rov, he's not talking about rov in quantity, but rather rov in quality. What does that mean? He's not talking about whether it's mostly ochel or mostly psolas. For sure, if it's mostly psolas, then the ochel is batel to the psolas and it would be muktzah. But rather he's talking about the level of tircha. What would be graded tircha? And what he means is rov, that the tircha of the rov is greater than the tircha of the miut. Tirchas netilas apsoles is greater than netilas ochel in the case where he calls it rov solas. So it doesn't mean that there's rov solas. It means that there's a great deal of effort required to getting rid of the psolas. Vizutar shiura, but it's a smaller amount of psolas, and therefore he's going to have to work very hard if he removes the psolas. From Gamliel Omer Af Meidiach Vishola Tanya, we learned in the Beitza, Omer Abelazar Tzadik. Wait, just one moment. There's a note here that I wanted to add before we go on. He says, Kach Omer HaBreisa B'Mitvar B'Purim Shel Beis Hillel Yitol Sap Psoles. When does Beis Hillel tell him to take out the psolas? That's Shetirchas Netilas HaOchel Meruba Bitirchas Netilas HaPsoles. So again, it might be that there's more ochel than psolas. That by definition it has to be, otherwise it's muktzah. But in this particular scenario, to take out the ochel is a greater tircha. And in this case, although it's mostly ochel, but since it's easier to remove the psolas, that's what he has to do. In a scenario in which it's a greater amount of tircha, tremendous effort to remove the psolas, then everybody agrees that he should take the oath. And if on the other hand, the psolas is meruba bishiura, in volume there's more psolas, then asur, there's an isa tiltal regarding this tarovas because the rov is mavatel the miut, the psolas is mavatel the miut oath. Tanya, we learned in the Beitza Amar Rabbi Elazar B'Tzadik Kacha Yamin Hagum Shel Beis Rabbi Gamliel Shel Yemivim Deli Molei Adachim. They brought a barrel, a pail that was full of lentils, and there was psolas mixed in with the lentils. Mitzifim olav mayim, they would fill up this pail with water. And nimtza ochel lamata upsolas lamalo, and the psolas, the chaff or whatever it is, would float to the top, and they took the psolas off from the top. So whereas the stira vasanya ipcha, we have a Bryce that records just the opposite, that as a result of pouring in the water, the psolas goes down to the bottom, and the ochel stays on top, and they would take the ochel out, not the way you had it that the psolas would float to the top. Lo kasha, the afra. What kind of psolas are you talking about? Afra, afar, which is dirt that got mixed up with adashim, because when he takes it from the field, he still has some pieces of dirt mixed in, and that dirt is very heavy, and it goes all the way to the bottom. But that first brisa, the psolas floats to the top. That's big gile. Gile is made of straw. And if the straw is mixed with the adash, the straw is very light, and therefore it floats to the top. Whereas in the case of adashim, it was mixed with afar, which floats to the bottom because it's very heavy. And that leads us to the Mishnah of Doron. And the issue here is, what kind of gifts are you allowed to send on Yontif to a friend with regard to food substances. If the food is edible, then obviously you're allowed to send it because we eat food on Yom Tov. But Beis Shammai Omrim, there's certain things that you should avoid sending on Yom Tov. Ein mishalchin b'Yom Tov, ela manos. Manos means that which is prepared to eat as is, like, for example, slices of meat or fish, and the recipient will just simply put it on his table. However, other things that the recipient requires work in order to prepare them, then we're afraid that he won't do that on Yom Tov. He'll leave it for tomorrow, and you're not allowed to send a gift on Yom Tov that won't be used until tomorrow, because that's derech chol. Then he's treating Yom Tov as if it was a weekday. Beis Hillel Omrim, a more liberal interpretation of the halacha, behema mishalchen behema chayav yof, bein chayim bein shvutim, mishalchen yenos shmonim uslotos v'kitnios. In all these cases enumerated in the Mishnah, Beis Hillel is mekil because there's a way of preparing them on Yom Tov. For example, if you have a behema chayav yof, it's shechted, and you eat its meat, and shchita is mutar on Yom Tov. In the cases of yayin, shmonim, uslotos, in all these cases, he can use them on Yom Tov, even though it may require a certain element of preparation, but that preparation is mutar on Yom Tov. So these are re'uyim la'achila u'shesiyah. And in the footnote, he writes, he needs a tikkun. Nevertheless, tikkunam lachila v'shchitu bishol mutar b'yontif, sharei zu meleches ochel nefesh. Avalot tfuah. But Beis Hillel agreed that you're not allowed to send natural raw kernels of grains, because in order to make that edible on Yom Tov, you'd have to violate the Tchina, which we said is also on Yom Tov. And that's based on the principle that Kol Malacha Sheyachal Lasosa Me'erev Yom Tov, Asur Lasosa B'Yom Tov, Afshi Litzorech Ochel Nefesh. So this Tvua, he could have done the Tchina on Erev Yom Tov, and Tama Kemach Lo Yifo. And therefore, we're not going to allow him to do this Tchina on Yom Tov. So if you send him Tvua, he won't be able to enjoy it on Yom Tov. Reb Shimon Matir B'Tvua. Reb Shimon allows everything on, even Tvua you can send to your friend on Yom Tov, because you can eat it without Tchina, without even grinding it, by putting it into a kedera and cooking it, or using a macheshes katana to remove the chaff. The Gemara now quotes a Beitza Tani Rabbi Rav Yechiel, ubilvad shelo yasenu bishura. We're not going to allow you to make a whole public incident about this. And that's called a shura. Shura means that you have a large group of people that are carrying your gift to so-and-so, and there's a whole kol amula. This, everybody's, it's like a parade. And that's not something that's appropriate for Yom Tov. That's appropriate for what's called mechira l'shuk, when you want to sell massive volumes of merchandise in the marketplace. Then for the purpose of that sale, you set up a whole group of people, a whole entourage, people that are carrying the merchandise out into the public. And that's not something that would be appropriate for Yom Tov. Tana, we learned in the Beitza, ein shura p'husa mishlosha b'nei adam. He's got a group of 3 people, that's prohibited. Boy, Rav Ashi asks the following question: Tlosa gavri tlosa mini mai. What happens if he has 3 people, but each one is carrying a different kind of foodstuff? Is that prohibited? Let's explain the 2 tzadim of Rav Ashi's question. Do we judge each min unto itself, and we separate one person from another because each person is carrying a different min, and therefore it should be mutter. Or should we say, no, let's judge them all together, even though each one is bringing a different min, but yet they're all being sent together from Ruvain to Shimon, the recipient. And the Gemara answers, Teku, we don't know. The Rambam Haskins in Perikei Milchus Yontiv that in this case of a suffix, mutter l'shloach. And the Magen Mishnah explains the whole issue of l'shloach is in a shura is only the Rabbanon. It's nira kimolichan limkar bashuk. And therefore, in the case of suffix, we apply the principle of suffix to Rabbanon l'kulo. Rabbi Shimon Matir v'tvua. Tanya, we learned to the Bryce Rabbi Shimon Matir v'tvua. Kigon chitim lasus mihen ludios. There's a certain foodstuff that's made from natural chitim. Or siorim, that's also roy on yontif litain lifnei be'emto. You can feed his animal. Adashim lahachil esesam. No, it doesn't say. Lasos mehem resisin. I just want to see if you're awake. And you're allowed to make a certain kind of food with lentils on yontif. Now we get to the last Mishnah here on Daf Yudalid Amid Beis. Mishalchim Kalim. You're allowed to send your friend garments, bein tfurim, whether they are sewn up in a royal levisha, bein sheidim tfurim. And the Gemara is going to ask, what are you going to do if they're not tfurim? You can't wear them if they weren't sewn. Afal pishi yesh beim kalayim. And even if there's a mixture of wool and linen together, which is also the levisha, shehein litzarach hamoed, because they have a purpose on yontif. Exactly what the purpose is, the Gemara is going to try to spell out. Avalo sandal hamisumar. This is a kind of a sandal that's made of wood, and on the outside they covered it with leather, and there are nails that are permanently attached to connect the R with the eights, low. We're not allowed to send that on Yom Middle, Sheina Tafur. We have a machlokas about the case of a minnow that hasn't yet been sewn. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Aflo minnow lovam tzarich uman. Excuse me, there's no machlokas about minnow Sheina Tafur. That's for sure. It's not roy with plum, and it's awesome to send it. Rabbi Yehuda adds another case, and that's called a minnow lovan. It hasn't yet been dyed. It's in its natural state like a hide, like natural leather, it's white. They should tzarich uman, because in order to dye it, you need a professional. Anything that you could benefit from on Yontif, you're allowed to send it. The Gemara says, Bishleim, I understand tfurim. If he's sending him begadim that were already woven, that's fine. He can use it to wear it, but ain't tfurim. And what about a case where it's not sewn up? Liksuye, chazul liksuye. He can cover his body with it, like a cape. Ella, but what about kilayim? That you're not allowed to wear around your body. L'may chazul. So what is it suitable for? B'chitem, if you'll say chazul l'meimach, to say, maybe you're allowed to fold them up and use it like a pillow. But Tanya, we learned in the Bryce, the pasuk says in Vayikra Yutes in Parshas Kedoshim, "Ubeged kilayim shatnes lo yale olef." And what do we derive from lo yale olefa? Avalato yochel latzia tachtecha. Would you allowed to? But you're allowed to put it as a pillow under your body. Lo yale olefa is only on top as a blanket. But nevertheless, the Rabbanan prohibited it. Also, Lassus came 17 charach lo. Maybe as he's laying on this kilayim, maybe it'll fold over onto his body as he's laying there, and nima al bisara. He will now violate the Isur lo silva shatnes. And if you'll say the mafsik midi beni, maybe he's wearing different begadim, and on the top of all these begadim, he is wearing kilayim. No, that's also prohibited. Amar Rab Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rab Shimon Levi, Amar Rab Yosef ben Shalom Rabbi Mishum kol kadish lishalayim afilu matzos zu al gavizu. This is like the princess of the pea, and you have one mattress on top of the other, stacked one on top of the other. Ukelayim tachteyem, and you're going to climb on the top, the 10th matzah, the 10th mattress on top, and there's kilayim underneath the 10 mattresses. Also lishan aleh. You're not allowed to sleep on them, Mishum, because the Torah says, Beged Kilayim Shanis Lo Yale Olecha. And the Rabbanan are afraid that if we allow you to sleep on them, he's going to come to put it on top of himself. Yavo Lahalos Olav is Beged HaKalayim. Ella says, that which you're allowed to send a Beged Sheyesh Bo Kilayim on Yontif, that's only in a case of a vilon. Vilon is like a mechitza. It's a curtain that closes up an opening. And kilayim is mutar ba'no, and there's no chashash of levisha in this case. So Gemara says, what do you mean? I should worry that he might take it down and use it to cover his body. Why? Amar Ula says, vilon tame. Why is it that if there's tumah in the house, the vilon itself is makabel tumah, and it's not considered as a mechitza of the bias, which is not makabel tumah? Mipnei shashamash mischamim kinegdo, because the servant will sort of wrap the vilon around his body, and that makes it into a kli, and it's not a bias which is considered a mechitz, which is considered mechuber lekarka. It's not makabel tumah; it's makabel tumah, and therefore, says the Gemara, based on the logic of Ula, that the shamash will somehow be mischamim, he'll warm up his body by rubbing his body to the vilon, then we're not going to allow you to use a beged shel kilayim as a vilon, because if that's the case, you're being machshil, you're causing a violation on the part of the shamash who's going to be mischamim kedegdo. Here on the top of Tesvav, Ella, but rather, we're going to interpret the Mishnah under what circumstances do we allow you to send a beged sheish bo kilayim b'kashim, a kind of a beged that's very tough and it cannot be used to be machamim, and therefore you can sit on them, and then it's royal tashmish. Diha di Omar Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua Hai Namto Gamdo Dinarash, a beged which is called leved, and it's very tough. And they produce it, manufactured in a place called Narosh, is Sharia, even if it has kilayim in it, you're allowed to sit on it because it's not mechamim. Amar Rav Papa, here's another way of interpreting why you're allowed to send begade kilayim if it's kosher and it's not mischamim. Ardolayim. These are begadim that he uses as a kind of a sock meaning for his feet. He wraps his feet into these ardolayim. It's kind of like galoshes or something like that, and that separates it from the minal, from the shoe. And it's in modern Hebrew they call it a midras. I don't know if you know what I mean, but they put it under the heel. And ein b'hem mishum kilayim, because they're so tough that he doesn't get any hanos chimum, and it's not called levisha, and therefore it is mutter. Okay, here's where we're going to stop for today. And the Beitza Shem, tomorrow we start with Omar Rava, here on Daf Tesvav Amid Aleph. So